to be here today to talk with you about what I think is a really fascinating topic. This is actually my second humanistic psychology meeting I've attended. The first one was in late 1972. I was 22 years old, living in New York City, and a friend of mine said, you know, there's an interesting speaker at a humanistic psychology conference in Manhattan. Let's go. And it turned out to be Stanislav Grof talking about his remarkable work at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. So after hearing Stan Grof speak, I thought to myself, gee, I'd love to do something like this one day. And lo and behold, I did. So we did our study at Harvard-UCLA Medical Center and the Los Angeles Biomedical Research Institute there, and we were funded by the Hefter Research Institute. Hefter is H-E-F-F-T-E-R. I should say, as a disclaimer, I'm on the board of Hefter. We're really devoted to facilitating research, clinical and basic science research with psychedelics using updated methodologies. So I said some of that. So in terms of disclosure, we're funded by Hefter. I get a little money from a couple other places, but not for this study. So, psilocybin chemically is 4-phosphoryloxyamine and dimethyltryptamine, and it's very close chemically with the neurotransmitter serotonin. It has also very low physiological toxicity, although adverse psychological effects are something to be concerned about. Attending to optimal set and setting is key to ensuring positive outcome. And that was some knowledge gleaned really from the earliest researchers that gone back to the early mid-60s. Psilocybin cubensis is the mushroom that most people in this country are aware of. We actually use purely synthetic psilocybin, laboratory synthesized by a laboratory in Massachusetts that's under contract with the government to make Schedule I drugs for human research. And, but it's a little different than mushrooms. Mushrooms contain 3 different alkaloids, psilocybin, psilocin, and baeocystin. We were just working with psilocybin. But of course, that implies there's a lot of room for further work with these other alkaloids, which might be very interesting. Very famous article. Mushrooms had been part of the indigenous pharmacopoeia throughout Latin America prior to the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. And the Spaniards were horrified by the native use of psychoactive plants for healing and for ritual spiritual use, and they harshly condemned the use and inflicted terrible punishments. So essentially the use of psilocybin among anyone essentially disappeared. So by the time the 1950s roll around, it was thought by many scholars that psychedelic mushrooms did not exist, that it was either confusion with peyote or it was just some old mythology that had been passed down. But in the mid-50s, an amateur mycologist named R. Gordon Watson, who was also a J.P. Morgan vice president of Wall Street, heard from Robert Graves, the British scholar, that there was an extant mushroom cult in the Central Highlands of Mexico, a very remote area. Under much hardship, he found this area and made the acquaintance of an Indian curandera, a woman who was a shaman utilizing mushrooms for healing, and she introduced Wasson into the realm of experience. Wasson was so impressed with the experience and with its implications that he wrote an article which was published in that prestigious Life magazine, popular magazine. This, by the way, has nothing to do with mushrooms. That's Bert Lahr on here. Mushrooms that cause strange. 2 other famous, Albert Hoffman, known for synthesizing LSD. What's not widely appreciated is he was the first medicinal chemist to isolate from samples of mushrooms that Wasson had sent to the leading medicinal chemists in the country, in the world. He was the first to isolate psilocybin. And Aldous Huxley, the great British literary figure, was introduced to psychedelics, mescaline initially, in the early 1950s. For the final decade of his life, he really devoted himself to writing about the implications of these profound compounds. And he had a belief that they might be useful in facilitating the passage from life into death. And true to his beliefs, he arranged with his doctor and his wife Laura to be injected with 100 micrograms of LSD as he went into his dying process, which incidentally turned out to be November 22nd, 1963, the same day John Kennedy was assassinated, so major loss on a couple of scores. Let me also mention, though, before I talk about our study, is that essentially we were replicating the work of the earlier researchers from the 50s and 60s, starting with Eric Cass, Sidney Cohen, Gary Fisher, Walter Pahnke, and most importantly, Stan Grof, who probably has conducted approved psychedelic research with more patients than anyone in history. And his work, of course, was limited from the 50s to the early 70s when everything was shut down. But we really got our inspiration and much of our approach from early investigators like Stan Grof.